I have the honor right now of presenting our first speaker, who is Dr. Sherene Shalhub, who's an associate professor of surgery at the University of Washington. She has been enormously successful in her academic career. She currently has funding from the PCORI to study patient engagement and decision-making for treatment of aortic dissection. She also has funding from the Ehlers-Danlos Society and has over 50 publications, and she's going to teach us today how to write a great paper. Thank you.
Thank you for this kind introduction. I'm really delighted to be here. I think this is a very exciting event, and I'm looking forward to other ones. So truly, it's my honor to be tasked with talking to you over the next 5 minutes on how to write a paper. I'm presuming the screen looks, you can see my slides at this point. Perfect. All right, so we'll dive in. So every writer actually has a writing toolkit, and this is something, I can say that for me it was not intuitive, and so what I'm hoping that I will share with you is some of the lessons I've learned along the way. And so I will talk about the anatomy of a project and a paper, as well as I'll touch in on instructions to the authors that you should be aware of, understanding authorship criteria, and then managing references, and then I'll close with some final tips. But if you walk away with nothing else, I just want you to remember that the process of writing really goes hand in hand with your research project. This is not something that you should put off all the way to the end. And the other component is that it's an iterative process. So what you start with is not really what you end up as a final product. And so be patient with yourself and write as you go. And so I broke it down in terms of how you would link your paper with your project as it goes along. And the way I think about it is that you have this stage of project inception. This is an exciting stage where you're thinking about your hypothesis or your objective. And at that time, you're assembling your team of collaborators who eventually will be your authors. You're performing your literature search and picking your reference manager program, which I'll talk about that at the end. And during that time, that's the best time to write your introduction, which is usually a short 2 paragraphs that say, here's the problem, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and this is what we hope to accomplish. So that's your aims and your hypothesis. And moving forward now, this is where I would say it's potentially the area where people tend to potentially can skip, and I would advise you not to skip and really spend a lot of time on this. This is your project design, and that goes hand in hand with your methods for writing the paper. So here's where you outline what your primary and secondary objectives are, who's your study population, who are you including and excluding. You're going to define your variables, and hand in hand you create your data dictionary, and that translates then to your data collection tool and your shell tables. And the shell tables are the ones that are going to eventually be in your results section. And once you prepare that, you can submit all that to IRB and get approval. This is also the time to be thinking about your statistical analysis plan, who's going to do your analysis, whether it's yourself or if you're hiring somebody to help you with this. And after you confirm all that, you have to sit down and think about what are my limitations up front. A priori, you already know that any study design has its own inherent limitations. So that's actually a good time to even start writing that part of the discussion up front, and as you anticipate what these limitations look like. Now here's the part that's the most time-intensive part. So now you've implemented your project, you're moving along with collecting your data, and then eventually you'll get to data analysis. I would say this is probably the sexiest part for me anyways of the paper writing because it's the most fun part where you finally have all your data and it's cleaned up and you're analyzing it and you're seeing what you found. As you analyze, I've made it a habit now to write my results section hand in hand as I am analyzing it. I usually have a big Excel sheet in which I'm putting in the data as I go along. That makes it easier later on to create the tables that I have to have in the paper at the end. And it's also the time to think about how you want to lay out your data, whether you want them to be in table format or in figure format, and what goes where. So this is a great time and an exciting time of writing a paper. All right, so you've done all this, so now you have to sit back and interpret your data. How does this fit in? And this data interpretation is really what goes into your discussion. And so the way I think of that about the discussion is that it's 4 parts. You're going to summarize your results. There's that part that says, here's what we found. So you want to state your results, but without rewriting all your results. So you just want to summarize them. And then now you have to place that in the world in this space of the other literature. How does this compare to other literature? How does it agree or disagree with what's out there? This is the time to explain your unexpected findings. And again, look at your patterns of the disease or the findings that you found. How is it translatable to other models potentially, or other patient populations, or other animal models, depending on what you're working on. But this is the time to do all of that. So basically your discussion is these 4 parts. Like I said, the summary, compare, contrast, and then how does it relate to all of everything else that's in the world, and then a conclusion statement. And that leads you again to the summarizing the data at the end. So this is your concluding paragraph, your takeaway message, what you want people to remember from that paper that you just wrote. You can go back and revise your introduction, maybe move some things that you put in the introduction to the discussion and vice versa, and then write your abstract. And I cannot emphasize this enough. The abstract, in my opinion, should be the last part that goes in writing, basically, rather than the first part. It is a lot harder, I think, to write an abstract up front and then come back and try to write a paper, rather than just summarizing everything you've done and hit the high notes in that abstract. It's also the time to highlight the article highlights that will go into the paper. So with that, I'm going to close by talking about a few other things. One is that every journal has instructions to the authors. Download them, read them, be aware of how the editors and the reviewers want to see your paper and what format it's going to be in. This is, for example, for the JVS-Vascular Science. Also be aware of what qualifies as an author. All authors have to fulfill 4 criteria. They have to be active in research, whether it's conception or design, analysis or interpretation or data collection, also with writing the manuscript and critically revising it, and they have to be responsible for the content that's going into that paper. References, I'll just touch base briefly on that. You have to have some program that corrals your references. I really like the function of citing while I write. I usually use EndNote. Again, that keeps me organized when I'm writing. And then final tips, make your tables in Excel. It's easier to transfer them to Word. We talked about the references. And then just keep in mind when the writing styles, it's really simple from the standpoint that you're writing complete paragraphs. There's an opening, a middle, and an ending to each of those paragraphs. And ideally have somebody who's not a co-author review your paper. It's always helpful to have somebody who's not an expert in what you're writing look at this and say this makes sense or doesn't make sense. And lastly, don't forget to have fun. I think this is one of the most stress-reducing activities that I undertake, so I find it to be very therapeutic to put these papers together. So again, thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shalhub.